When the agenda was displayed for the September 2012 council meeting, it contained one very interesting item. Under allotments, Crownfield St Mark's, notice of arbitration. This was to prompt Mr Poll to go to the council meeting, and in the open forum, ask if a notice of arbitration had been served on the Crownfield Bank allotments. Historically, both blocks of allotments had had their rents reviewed at the same time. The clerk, Mrs Daisley, replied that there was only one notice of arbitration for Crownfield St Mark's. When asked who had served the notice, the clerk replied it was Hannah Skingsley of Carter Jonas. In the meeting, it was reported that copies of Councillor Arthur Mayall's allotment inspection report had been circulated, but in what had become a bit of a tradition, the meeting that the report was presented, Councillor Mayall was not in attendance. Councillor Terry Harrington expressed concern at the delay in being able to address some of the allotment issues, but all felt Councillor Mayall's representations should be given to the meeting. Agreed this item to be deferred to the October 2012 meeting. The clerk advised the meeting that there had been some negotiations on reletting some of the Battlefield's allotments. Previously, it had been agreed to offer Mr Cleverley plot number 5, as it was vacant, but in light of Mr Shortner's notice and following a site meeting, Mr Cleverley had requested that he take that plot instead. This would accommodate the parish council in then assigning plot number 5 to Mr Peacock, leaving plot number 6 then vacant instead. Councillor Terry Harrington expressed disappointment that following some renumbering of the plots in a previous year, he considered allotment records were not clear, and the plot numbers at Battlefield were still causing confusion. Plot 5 was near the gate, and in the spring Mr Peacock had been told that he could have that plot, and had cultivated part of it and planted some items on it, and then was told that it was let to someone else, so he was to remove most of what he had put on the allotment. But no one else had tried to cultivate it, and nobody had been to him to say that he should not have been on the allotment, and after he was to depart, nobody was to commence cultivations on it, and had been to the council offices to ask why he had been asked to leave the allotment when nobody else was using it. Holbeach was now gripped with rampant inflation. At the Finance Committee meeting of the 1st of October, members also recommended that the figure in which the parish council went out to tender be increased to £500, in view of inflation, and standing orders be amended accordingly. For years it had been £300, but when Mr Watson was engaged to do work on Battlefield allotments, he charged £400 plus VAT. The parish council standing orders stated that amounts above £300 should go out to tender. Questions had been asked about this payment, and it seems the parish council's answer was to move the amount that the parish council needed to go out to tender. Questions had also been raised about the payment of £150 plus VAT for work on the Northern Lane allotments. This referred to plot 25. On the 23rd of August, Mrs Daisley had been emailed Northern Lane allotments. At the council meeting of the 13th of August, the minutes of July 9th were signed. In them, Councillor Mayall states that the allotment complained about was sprayed 3 weeks prior. I believe that is allotment 25, which I believe is what is photograph attached, taken on the 14th of August. It does not look very dead. Can you please advise what the allotment mentioned by Councillor Mayall was sprayed with, and if the person applying the chemical has pre-operator certificates PA1 and PA2 and on the NROSO list. Mrs Daisley was not to email back. She was to see Mr Poll a few days later down Back Lane, near the council offices, and tell him that she did not like emails, and the questions he'd raised was nothing to do with him. Consequently, the questions remained unanswered. At the council meeting of October the 8th, Councillor Mayall presented a verbal report on his previously circulated annual inspection report, which had taken place in July. He was to reiterate that some allotments were in a poor state and required tidying, and referred to previous correspondence from a parishioner who had suggested that the Battlefield site might benefit from some of the plots being divided to form smaller garden type allotments, and advised this idea was being considered. With regard to Crownfield Holbeach Bank site, Councillor Mail advised that the existing tenant is under notice to quit, which would take effect during October 2012, and it was the intention of the parish council to ask the Crown Estate as owners of the land to take this site back into their care. Councillor Harrington advised that the Deputy Clerk had contacted Carter Jonas as agents for the Crown Estate, with a view to asking for the surrender on behalf of Holbeach Parish Council of this land. It would be necessary for the request to include accepting the land back in its present condition. But why was it the Deputy Clerk who had rung Carter Jonas, and not the clerk, Mrs. Daisley? Why was it that Mrs. Harrington could ring Carter Jonas and ask if they would accept the land back? In 2005, when letters were being sent to Carter Jonas and no reply being received, why did she not telephone them then? In 2010, in December, Mr. Bramley left the employ of Carter Jonas, and Wapload Estate tenants were told of his departure, but Mrs. Harrington, the then clerk, did not notify the parish council. But Councillor Mail and Councillor Harrington went to a meeting with the Crown in January 2011. There, it appears, they encouraged the handing back of the land to the Crown, without prior agreement of the parish council. In 2006, Mr. Bramley said there should be a deed of release, but never produced one. The new agent was not to produce one either. In 2006, Mr. Bramley, when referring to the rear of Mr. Palmer's property, said he pinched it, and in 2012, when Mr. Palmer was asked had he paid Bramley, all he was to say was, "I probably paid over the odds." So if Mr. Bramley had received money for something that was not his to sell, he could not very well take action against Mr. Palmer for what he claimed he had pinched, without it being exposed. It seemed a simple scam. Move the boundaries, tell the owners they never owned the land in the first place, get the tenant, the parish council, to agree the new boundaries, the old tenancy agreement disappears and a new one arrives. There was only one problem: the tenant on the allotments, having previously corresponded to another person at Carter Jonas who had stated where the boundaries were. Had they, between them, orchestrated a campaign against Mr. Poll, including the fires? Because if he was not farming, he would not want the allotments, and if he was not on the allotments, the whole matter could be covered up. And with Mrs. Harrington being able to phone the Crown and ask if they would take the allotments back, and previously offering Mr. Poll the chance to walk away from his allotment, and the council would waive any rent he owed, had she been involved in the scam from early on? Councillor Mail asked for other items relating to allotments to be taken in committee. The clerk informed the meeting that some reletting had been arranged of the Battlefield allotments, and number 6 remained as a vacant plot. She advised the waiting list would be consulted. Agreed. The clerk and chairman of allotments arranged to relet the vacant plot, but the plot was to remain vacant, as it is understood that no waiting list existed. This seemed to be another little scam. If we have a waiting list, why advertise vacant allotments? As there is a requirement to provide allotments where there is a need. If there is vacant allotments, there is no need, and if there's no need, there's no need for the parish council to keep the Crownfield Bank allotments, which suits the aim of handing them back to the Crown and to cover up what has gone before. But the notice to quit was incorrectly served.